Hello everybody, I am a Nerb and this is annerbs.blurbs, and today we're going to be talking about the chaos of the Umbrella Academy and how I think that it breaks the typical TV show narrative. The Umbrella Academy, to me at least, is one of the few things about 2020 that didn't come out a total train wreck. Season 1 of the Umbrella Academy was immaculate. More than a year ago now, I decided to watch it out of sheer boredom, which is the motivator behind most of my decisions, and it quickly became one of my all-time favorite TV shows, which is a very short list as most TV shows piss me off. I binged the whole thing over the course of 2 to 3 days and eagerly awaited more. Along came more. Somehow, inexplicably, the second season managed to retain all of the things that I loved about the first season, which is very rare for a TV show, especially a TV show that Netflix is responsible for. This is, in my opinion, because most of the time, TV shows that exist outside of the extremely episodic format like sitcoms and crime shows, when renewed for a second season, typically try to emphasize the things that they think are responsible for their viewership that got them renewed for a second or third or fourth season to begin with. All too often, the wrong things are the things that get emphasized, or because certain parts are being emphasized and other parts are being forgotten about, the pieces no longer fit together in a way that created the structure that was so beloved to make the first season so popular to begin with. Yes, Stranger Things, I am looking at you. But this did not happen with the Umbrella Academy. The second season was just as confusing, just as chaotic, just as funny and engaging as the first, while keeping a pretty good soundtrack once again. While I do have to say that the season 1 soundtrack I thought was at least a bit better. When I watched season 1, every single time a song was playing, I was like, whoa, this is incredible that they're using this song for this part. I never would have used this song for this part, but now that I see somebody using this song for this part, I can see that it's a great idea. With season 2, the soundtrack was still amazing. It just did not stick out so much to me as the first season soundtrack did. And also, there was a lot more songs in the second season. I'll have to check that to be sure, but watching it, it seemed like each episode had the equivalent of like 4 or 5 episodes from the first season's amount of songs in it. So yes, it's a great show, and if you have not seen it or its second season, you should go watch it 100%. But that's not actually what I'm talking about right now. I'm not really here to recommend or to criticize a TV show as I have done in the past. Rather, I want to talk specifically about the nature of this show and the chaos that it envelops in its narrative, and how I think that is helping break down the very structured TV narrative. When watching the show, you realize very quickly, even from the first season, episode 1, that things just aren't always going to be explained to you. Things are introduced and you're either expected to pick up on them very quickly, or you're just expected to roll with the fact that they make no sense. But with the whimsical, slightly off world created around the story, it all works together to the benefit of all of the pieces. This goes to show with what I was speaking about before, especially with the second season to this show, specifically to emphasize or minimize any type of part that was crucial to its existence in the first season would undermine the entire show. The show is, in essence, peak chaos, and as such, it is a balancing act of keeping the audience's attentions retained while not frustrating them too much, but also making sure that there is a lot of interest while still having these characters, and all of that comes together very nicely in the first season in a way that is really easy to engage with. Making a second season and trying to emphasize or diminish parts that people either liked or didn't like would offset the entire balance, would diminish the narrative of this show. When describing this show, I typically think of viewing the Umbrella Academy like getting consecutively slapped in the face 1,000 times and liking it. By the time one question is answered in the show, inevitably 15 others have risen up to confuse you even further. It pushes the line of frustrating its audience, but it does in a way that keeps you watching rather than pushes you away from the show. And I think this is largely to do with the fact that all of the things that are frustrating about this show are also inherently very interesting. The questions that are not getting answered, which is most of the frustration, are questions that are interesting enough that you would wait to find out the answer, and are surrounded by circumstances and situations that would keep you watching regardless if the questions ever even got answered. Above all else, The Umbrella Academy is one of the most engaging TV shows that I've ever seen. And when a story in any format is engaging, it leaves a lot of room to push the bounds of what is typically expected or what is typically even allowed with the narrative. The Umbrella Academy's engagement typically comes from just how unique and interesting the experience experience of watching the show is. I think that the Umbrella Academy is one of those very few things that you will be able to see within your lifespan that does not fall under the category of there is nothing new under the sun. Typically being an avid consumer of media in general, just movies, TV shows, theater, books, the likes, comics, all that kinds of stuff, I have typically come to the understanding that there is no such thing as originality. Rather, it's more doing the best with what already exists. For me, the biggest example of this is Harry Potter, which is all in all 100% one of the most tropey stories that exist in the entire world. You have the wizard, you have the bearded man, you have the school. Yet it did it all in such an engaging and interesting and cohesive way that, I mean, look at it. So how is Umbrella Academy engaging? Well, it's creative, it's whimsical, it's extremely unique, but even more so, it starts you right off the bat in a world where just about anything is possible. There's a monkey butler who can speak, the mom's a robot, superheroes, also an apocalypse, not to mention the time travel and the very sudden pregnancies, which actually hasn't been explained yet. Each of these, though, exists in relation to everything else. Everything has rules that still dictate it and establish it within this world. It is not simply enough to have interesting thing and then just throw it into a situation. Interesting thing has to be grounded. And that's actually a really big reason why time travel works in this narrative, even when time travel really doesn't work in most. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out why creators keep thinking that they can just shoehorn in a time travel plot twist and not expect their audiences to get pissed off with them. A big part of this groundedness is that the world that the Umbrella Academy is established in is neither dependent entirely on fiction or entirely on realism. The world that exists in the Umbrella Academy is almost like a mirror image of our world, but if that mirror was one of those squiggly ones that kind of tweak the image that you are engaging with. So it's like looking in a bent mirror. The world in the Umbrella Academy, like looking in a mirror, means that what we see reflected in this world versus our world is almost identical, but it's kind of like looking at a mirror noticing that everything's not quite right. Thus, it's not so unfamiliar to its audience that it needs everything explained or established again, but it's not so set in reality that things like time travel and a monkey butler and superpowers can't exist. And that is another thing about this world that needs to be emphasized. Superhero movies are everywhere all the time. The whole person gets superpowers and exists in reality is a very typical narrative within popular culture. The thing that the Umbrella Academy does differently is that mirror image of our world. The world of the Umbrella Academy never feels like it is supposed to be fully ours. There are just enough slightly off aspects about it that really drive home that there is something inherently very unworldly or otherworldly about this world that is not a direct reflection of ours. And this really comes out in the style of how the show is filmed. Everything from the first scene to the scene immediately after it when the man is pushing the babies and they're following in the strollers, that way that everything kind of has this very patternistic appearance to it really drives home in the audience and our experience viewing this that this is not keyed into reality. So when more outlandish things are thrown in, they're allowed to fall in easily with the only slightly outlandish things that we typically see in a reality-based setting. In essence, it holds to this framework that most superhero movies do in some way or another strive for, but very few actually succeed in. Unless we're talking about a superhero show like The Boys, which is very much a narrative structured around reality, except the consequences are now different because superheroes are thrown into it, don't actually hold superheroes very well in them. We have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in essence, because Marvel is so big and exists so broadly, every other superhero narrative that exists or comes out has to either try to exist alongside Marvel or exist in a way that defies Marvel. And as such, most of these completely fall flat in world building because they never really establish a world that can exist with them in it. And I think even Marvel struggles with this a little bit. There are the ones that are very easily allowed to exist within the reality that has been made and created by the Marvel Universe, like Iron Man or even Captain America. But then you have these other entities like Thor, who really actually leads to a lot of world building questions that are never really answered or fully engaged with, but rather are just ignored but expanded on with other entities like the Guardians of the Galaxy, and just the job of the audience at that point is to suspend their disbelief and accept it. So when creating a world for superheroes, people often forget that they have to create a world that actually makes sense around the superheroes, and the Umbrella Academy is an interesting case because it doesn't do what most narratives do, which is have a world that doesn't know that superheroes exist and then throw the superheroes in and then build it up as the world comes to grasp the reality that it now lives in. The world of the Umbrella Academy has lived under the notion that superheroes exist for at least a good 20 to 30 years at this point. Even in the second season, when they go back in time to a time when there was no awareness that superheroes existed, the world itself, while still being based in reality, is still just patternistic enough that it takes you away from entire realism to place you more in this is odd and something odd is going on kind of mindset. The elements of the Umbrella Academy, if thrown into any other superhero movie, would destroy the world that it existed in and would obliterate it. The true catalyst with the Umbrella Academy is that in a world where realism has been structurally defined in a way where it doesn't hold so close to reality that more and more things become possible, while still grounded in a world where everything has rules and breaking those rules has consequences, a unique kind of creation is formed that we see in the Umbrella Academy that pushes a lot of boundaries and allows for a lot of very new and interesting ideas to exist very freely and organically. Playing back into the chaos in the show, you really do have to understand even the characters themselves are in essence very chaotic. You have a 15-year-old boy, you have a monkey man, you have an alien man, you have a robot woman, you have a flamboyant addict, a high-strung knife thrower who has a hero complex, a great female character with major issues, a dead octopus boy, and a violin playing atomic bomb. And it is absolute chaos, and they just play into that. And so you could have these characters who are essentially assholes, who abuse their powers, and still root for them because they're all so grounded into their world that they feel genuinely real to the audience, even with all of their crazy powers and comeuppance. Each character is very, very flawed. I don't think that that could be understated at all in regards to this show. The not anti-heroes in this show are more flawed than most anti-hero narratives, but they aren't flawed in that Bruce Wayne, I've experienced tragedy, so now I just brode and kill people kind of way. They are just assholes, and that has consequences. It is their selfishness and their cruelty, especially in regards to each other, that actually starts the apocalypse. Twice. Have I mentioned that things in the show are crazy all of the time? In both seasons, you are unceremoniously dumped, no pun intended, into the middle of a narrative that refuses to pause and give you time to catch up. You either put it together, or you don't. Things come in and come out, and if you miss them, that's on you. Things happen so fast, too, that this is a show you could probably watch 3 or 4 times and still pick up new things every single time. In this way, it does treat its audience in a very intelligent way, which is good, you should always do that, but it also treats its audience a bit like a younger sibling, like one that they don't want to take care of. Like, yeah, you can come along, just don't get in my way or ask any questions. It's great because it also really does take advantage of the fact that you don't have to explain things all of the time. Not every single question needs an answer. Not every plot device needs a backstory. Not everything that happens needs a huge setup, which is actually kind of the opposite of what is usually emphasized in any lesson about storytelling. But some things don't need explanations. Some things lacking an explanation can just get filled in by the context of the world around it. But more importantly, other things just don't need an explanation. Sometimes if there is something in your world that just is a little odd, the more you engage with it and try to explain it, the more the realism of it will fall apart. The people who made the show really understand both what should be expanded upon and what should not be expanded upon and why. The way that details are conveyed and the way that story is told in the show is done on a level that is actually really hard to find in most creative mediums. So how does the show break the narrative structure? Well, in my opinion, it does it by employing a group of assholes to lead a story that's already partially happened while jumping timelines like it's nobody's business in a world that is just off from a mirrored reflection of our own. To me, the Umbrella Academy has expanded upon what a TV show can be in setting, pacing, and payoff. In the Umbrella Academy, there aren't any filler episodes. Every single episode is a cohesive narrative that leads directly into the others. Even though there are cliffhangers, they come very naturally and it never feels like there's a point of the plot that is being withheld or slowed down so that the cliffhanger can happen right at the end of the episode. If you sit down and you watch these from the very beginning of the first episode to the very end of the last episode, you really won't be able to remember when episodes ended and where they started. It all feels like one very cohesive story, as if you're reading a book or watching a really, really long movie. Even Stranger Things has had a few filler episodes, and even Stranger Things has slowed down its plot in order to have the right cliffhanger happen at the end of an episode. And the pacing never slows down. I mentioned before that I don't typically like TV shows. This is exempt from sitcoms sitcoms and crime shows because they don't do this thing that pisses me off and makes me hate most TV shows. The reason why TV shows typically lose me after 1 or 2 seasons is because of the way that they are constructed. The way that TV shows are even written is based on a process of a lot of teamwork, and usually more than one person is writing the episodes as they go. So it's very common to be watching a TV show and see that the written by changes episode to episode. This results in a lot of fluidity issues and cohesive issues. I've also noticed, especially for TV shows that are written for a younger teen audience or even a young adult audience, that the characters often just completely forget to behave episode to episode and will act like completely different people whenever the plot needs them to. How TV shows usually operate is with an A to Z structure, with A being the introduction to the overarching conflict of the season that comes up in episode 1, and then with Z being the final conclusion or wrap-up of that conflict that usually spans 1 to 2, maybe sometimes 3 episodes. At that point, B through Y literally becomes anything. Anything and everything, with hints of the big conflict being thrown in here and there so you don't forget what you're watching. But anything, any kind of meager, tiny conflict that can keep the show rolling up until you get to point Z again. And this is inherently problematic in most TV shows because how they get those conflicts is they make their characters act like morons. They make their characters treat each other poorly and do stupid things to cause more issues that the audience then has to be engaged with, so that we are not distracted from the show, but we are being distracted from the fact that the big conflict isn't actually going on in front of us right now, because if they actually try to play out the big conflict from one cohesive point to the last cohesive point, it would only span a few episodes. Another thing that TV shows commonly do is the big conflict is just dragged out. So if you know that if we focused in the narrative and only did the big conflict and didn't add anything extra or any side plots or B plots or stupid character decisions, that it would last us, let's be generous and say 5 episodes most of the time, then to get it to the necessary amount, they just drag it on, make everything slower. They make their characters act stupid as to not figure out the plot in advance. In this way, the big conflict is just dragged kicking and screaming until it becomes a hollow husk of a narrative. Sometimes there is the episodic format of TV shows like sitcoms and crime shows means that A and Z all exist within one episode, just to be remixed and repeated in the next. There is no frustrating draw out because there is no need for one. And how are you still alive? Sorry about that. The world's largest bug was on my window. Scared me. Okay, I was talking about TV shows. There is no frustrating draw out because there is no need for one. And because until recently with streaming services, TV shows actually needed a certain amount of episodes to air, most plots overstay their welcome after just a season or 2. And some shows, the necessary introduction of new conflicts to keep the seasons rolling gets so convoluted that the entire world of the show just completely falls apart. This is actually what happened in the show Arrow, if you guys remember that, where for the first few seasons, it was strongly suggested that it was based in a very realistic kind of narrative, and then I stopped watching it very shortly after that, but eventually got to a point where there was so much magic involved that nothing held any consequence anymore, because the magic didn't have any rules either. It was just magic. So every single time anything went wrong or a character died, they'd just be magic back to life. It happened like 100 times in 2 seasons. It was ridiculous. The world fell apart. The introduction of streaming services means that TV shows with fewer episodes and more condensed plots are actually taking off and leading the forefront of what TV shows are meant to be nowadays. And I am here for it. But a structure does still exist. Thing happens, characters engage with thing, tipping point, big drama, conclusion, cliffhanger for the 2nd season. Umbrella Academy is not entirely removed from the structure, but it is stretching it out. The fast-paced, middle of the story, what is going on chaos is the precedence of this expansion. The Umbrella Academy may very well be one of the few shows where I don't know where it's going most of the time. Mostly with TV shows and most mediums too, the formulaic aspects of it have become so ingrained into how stories are constructed that just by really being engaged with a lot of TV shows at the same time, you can really guess where anyone is about to go. With the Umbrella Academy, this is very difficult to do. Not only is it very difficult to guess what's going to happen next, it's guess to assume basically anything. Everything is basically an anomaly within this show. Everything is new. Everything is refreshing. And with all of that, in this golden time of shortened, more condensed stories within TV shows, the Umbrella Academy is really, really shining. And I think that with so much of the odd point points of the show and so much of the unusual aspects, mixed along with all of the skill that has been put into creating this TV show, I really do feel like this is going to be another one of those factors that pushes the bounds of what a TV show has been allowed to be in society and in media. I, for one, am so excited for this. With the introduction of any medium, exploration within that medium is sure to follow. I mean, every single time a new way of telling a story comes about, you want to find every way possible to tell a story within that medium. And with really long-lasting mediums or really popular mediums like literature and movies, the expansion of what can be done within those mediums has been explored and pushed out to almost every breaking point. But TV shows have notoriously been very formulaic, with very little exploration into what they could be. To have this period of time where what it means to be a TV show is being redefined is so exciting and so long overdue, in my opinion. Real quick, another point. Time travel. There are few things that lose me in fiction as quickly as when the world is at its end, something irreversible has just happened, usually horrific, it has just occurred, and out of nowhere, somebody is like, what about, but have you considered, what if we just time travel? And then everything goes away and ta-da, it's all fixed. It's like it never happened. Yes, this even pissed me off in Endgame. I think it is incredibly stupid and completely ruins whatever thing or lead up brought the readers to that decision. You know, the decision that corrupted the entire narrative. Not only is it ingenuine to the strife, but it's also just lazy writing. However, I was not mad at the Umbrella Academy when they did this. Why? Especially when I obviously feel so passionate about it? Well, A, it's because it didn't come out of nowhere. This ability is not only just hinted at throughout the entire series, but it's a huge part of everything that happens over the course of the show. Nothing in this story exists without time travel. The story doesn't exist without time travel. So time travel can be a natural solution to an otherwise irreversible problem. And B, because time travel is really grounded into this world. It's grounded in such a way that it feels like a natural element of it, a natural component. There's so much world building that goes on surrounding the idea of time travel, and that isn't usually done when time travel is just introduced into a narrative. In fact, it's almost never done when time travel is just introduced into a narrative. Usually the most world building you get is somebody tells you what kind of time travel this is going to be. The Umbrella Academy is the only narrative that I've ever bared witness to that has done this component in a way that I could get behind. In conclusion, go watch the show. Alright, so on my last video I got some comments that my cuts were too frequent and made the entire video very jumpy, and one person said that it gave them anxiety. So I took that into mind and tried to do better this time with my editing. Let me know what you think. Please comment below, like this video, subscribe if you want, and also I do have a couple more videos planned that I am really excited for. I just have to get through the stuff that I want to talk about, so please stay tuned for that. And I do believe that's all. So this has been Anerb, and this was my blurb. Thanks, bye!